Hey sophomores, here we are, ready to talk about Gladwell's chapter 3 and 4. Now, I don't expect you to have read Outliers chapters 3 and 4 yet. This is just the video for context. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we want to appreciate that over the course of the book so far, we've spent a lot of time thinking about relative age, the advantage of exponentially compounding experiences, and the benefits that 10,000 hours of hard work confers. As we look at chapters 3 and 4, which work together as a pair, you can even tell he titles them part 1 and part 2, we're going to be looking at the IQ threshold. We're going to be looking at what EQ, or practical intelligence, does. And we're going to be looking at two different parenting styles, concerted cultivation and natural growth. So the essential questions I want you to consider as we read both chapters 3 and 4 over Friday and Monday of this week and next week is this: why doesn't everyone fulfill their potential? Smart people are everywhere. Why are there outliers? And to what extent are intelligence and achievement correlated? Why don't all smart people achieve everything they're capable of? So, ladies and gentlemen, your practical activities as sophomores at Skyline are the following things. Today, I want you to watch this video. I'll try to be brief to give you context and decode some important pre-reading terms. Then I want you to go ahead and read chapter 3. On Monday, I'd like you to go ahead and read chapter 4 and then pop back on for the second video so that you can analyze and use this Gladwellian content. Think of this as like, a homework assignment over a weekend or something like that for the average year. So again, our essential question for chapters 3 and 4 is, to what extent is there a correlation between intellect and achievement? And Gladwell gives us three, or really four, but three specifically, case studies in order to help us understand why all smart people don't achieve everything they're capable of. He's going to introduce us to a Stanford psychologist named Lewis Terman, who studied children, highly achieving, gifted children, to consider whether or not that intelligence has truly been a gift for them. Christopher Langan is another man who's incredibly smart with one of the highest recorded IQs ever. But he is ultimately a farmer in Missouri and is not an outlier in any way that we would consider to be an outlier. The next person we're going to talk about is Robert Oppenheimer. And some of you may or may not be aware, but he's essentially credited for inventing the atomic bomb. And though he was a smart guy, he also had an emotional quotient, or an ability to have practically use his intelligence with other people and within situations in order to manifest a much greater level of success than someone like Christopher Langan, who arguably has a similar IQ. The last way we're going to look at this is parenting style, the way that our parents act with us and the way that our parents react to us necessarily is going to be a fundamental aspect of determining our personality. So two parenting styles are considered: concerted cultivation, which is the vast majority of the time what we see on the plateau. That's when parents attempt to instill and develop the skills and gifts that they see in their children, versus natural growth. Natural growth is when parents kind of leave children through choice, socioeconomic marginalization, or through, personality, to let their children kind of grow up free range. Sometimes students in my class think that their parents are natural growth parents, but I think after you read chapter 4, you'll probably appreciate that it kind of goes a lot beyond this. It would be like if you actually schedule your own doctor's appointments and your follow-ups. That's the kind of natural growth we're talking about. So we'll be using these 4 case studies over the course of 2 chapters in order to introduce why genius isn't always perfect and successful. Okay guys, as we move forward, I want to make sure that you've got some terminology. Obviously, I hope that you understand what sociology is, as we covered that in the first lecture, as well as pop sociology. The difference between the two, essentially, is that sociology is scientific writing. It's a different genre, whereas pop sociology is far more readable. We'll talk a lot more about the tenets of Gladwell's style once we've gotten about halfway through the book. We've talked about relative age and how the accident of your birth necessarily impacts your success. We've also talked about the advantage of exponentially compounding experiences, how good instruction early can have a profound advantage over time. Today, yesterday you talked about 10,000 hours, the way that some volume of time that you spend practicing can positively impact your level of success. In chapters 3 and 4, we're going to consider three other factors, like I mentioned. IQ, or intelligent quotient, a psychological test that was created in France in order to help identify learners that struggled so they could get support. Ironically, it's used for completely the opposite reason. The idea of an IQ threshold, which is a Gladwellian concept that at a certain point for success, you're smart enough that there's a certain IQ past which it doesn't confer a significant greater advantage within society. We'll talk about that idea in just a second. And then we're also going to consider EQ, or your emotional quotient. And that's sort of a very different type of intelligence. It's a normative idea. It means that ultimately it is an idea that is not tested. It's not a psychological test, but it's very much something that we know impacts individuals and their ability to be successful. So we'll get that in just a second. First, let's get some context with IQ. Now, when Doran and I grew up, the only method to get you into a accelerated honors learning program was an IQ score. My program, which was called Gifted at the time, now we call it higher achieving or high capacity, right? Like high cap learners is the technical term that we use for gifted learners today, because we realize that a significant intelligence may not always feel like a gift to everybody. Does that make sense? So when I was younger and it was called gifted education, it was like if you don't do something with it, you've wasted your gift. But now we realize, because words matter, that high capacity learners just have different challenges, right, than other types of learners and different types of success. Back to IQ. In order for Doran and I to get sort of the advantage of exponentially compounding experiences, both of our parents took us to have an IQ test in our school, and that single measure of our ability was designed to put us into the honors program. There was no appeals process. Your IQ was your IQ. And as a result, people were tracked throughout their educational careers as a result of what potential one test had seen in them. And obviously, as you can probably imagine, Doran and I were very fortunate to have risen on a tide of cultural privilege in order to be very successful in that test. Hopefully there's some talent and preparation involved as well. But we want to appreciate, right, that the IQ test has been used in a lot of different ways. Let's zoom a little bit deeper. Now, what the IQ test assessed was, it was this guy, okay, and his name was Binet. And Binet and his colleagues developed questions that focused on things that hadn't been taught in school. So it wasn't about learning. It wasn't about the way that, content that you learned. It wasn't about, the fact that Hitler was elected, right? And terrible things we've learned like that. It was about the idea of problem solving skills. So some children were able to answer more advanced questions, while other children of the same age were only able to answer questions younger children could answer. So Binet went ahead and he suggested the concept of the measure intelligence based on average abilities of children of a certain group. Now this may be so built into our educational system that you might be like, yeah, that's not a big idea. But it actually was, to consider what is the average sort of set of abilities a student has. That helps us determine what you should learn at each grade level. So really it's the basis of the curriculum and the content that you've been taught, right? That certain children at certain age and a certain culture have certain abilities, and we want to cultivate those in order to make society better. Now, Binet himself did not believe that his IQ test should be used the way it was used in Doran's and my education. We were fortunate, like I said, it worked out well for us, but we can't imagine the untold number of people, right, who were marginalized for a variety of reasons, partially culturally, linguistically, from this one way to access sort of advanced and increasing education. Binet wanted to use this essentially to go ahead and find out what kids in France were going to need extra help in school. It was designed to go ahead and support struggling learners. Ironically, it was used to marginalize struggling learners from accessing sort of the best aspects of education. It was used to keep people out as opposed to help people. So I just want to shout out to Binet. He had a good idea that was manifested as a gatekeeper to access big ideas. Okay, I always like to make sure that I can provide a chart and a graph to help us understand the idea of IQ. Remember, IQ is about average intelligence. So 100, a real nice round number, is the average. Most people have an IQ of about 100. But what we're going to appreciate, right, is that there are very few people at the very top and the bottom of the IQ scale. So with this, we want to appreciate that the vast majority, okay, of the people that look at an IQ will have an IQ in like the dark blue zone that you see here. Um, Gifted education, right, or what we now call high capacity education, was focused on identifying people on the far right hand side of this particular graph in order to manifest their potential. But the real reason that the IQ test was created by Binet was that he wanted to identify people on the left side of the curve, not to stigmatize them, not to marginalize them, but to, within the French school system, help them attain the skills they need to like have a level playing field. So some irony into the way this happened. And then unfortunately, not only was this used to kind of marginalize people who didn't score quite as well on the IQ test, I want to be absolutely sure that I take some space today to go ahead and talk about how the IQ has been used to justify racism. Much like Binet's IQ test was used to marginalize people who tested poorly in that test, the measure of intelligence, we often find racist individuals using the IQ numbers in order to justify a belief, a false, unscientific belief, that Black people are less intelligent than white people. If you begin looking on the internet and start researching the ways that individuals have used IQ to separate and differentiate between races, most of the time what you will have found is a terrible, terrible portrait of white supremacy. What you will also appreciate, right, is that this is not dissimilar to when individuals back in the antebellum Civil War times would go ahead and use the Bible, talking about the children of Ham, to justify slavery. We see people using the IQ science in order to go ahead and justify their racist beliefs. You know, I hope you know, and I want to make sure you know, that the privileged gatekeepers to opportunity within United States society that goes all the way back to the triangle trade of slavery, that goes to the Three-Fifths Compromise, the idea of ultimately separate being equal, which it never is. Separate is never equal. Better is never better for everybody. And so, ladies and gentlemen, oftentimes we see some white supremacists attempting to use IQ to justify their supremacy. This is false. This is not science. This is racism. So I just wanted to take a moment to show you a couple of books that white supremacists have used. I want to be clear that these are not white supremacist books, but they are books that have statistics in them that have been misappropriated in order to cause pain for people of color. Please do let me know if you have any other questions about this, or if you encounter anything that you would like to talk about, because IQ and race is a whole other thing that is worthy of our investigation. But let's go ahead and let's make sure we understand what IQ is, right, before we go ahead and do all the research into the racial piece. So before we apply these ideas of IQ to sort of these larger social problems, I want us to go ahead and I want us to make sure that we understand what Gladwell is bringing to the table here. So what is the argument that Gladwell makes about IQ threshold in chapter 3 and 4? What number is that particular threshold? And how does Gladwell use the alma maters of Nobel Prize winners to prove his point? Most of my students are usually completely fascinated about what their IQ is at the end of this sort of set of readings and lectures. You know, Dorn and I are fortunate that we know what our IQs are, where our IQs are actually just like a point or two apart. Very, very close. Our mothers have confirmed this. I won't tell you. Maybe he'll tell you. So an idea that's actually more important to me than IQ, which is really more on that like talent spectrum, something you're kind of born with, rather than something that you can necessarily change, because your IQ kind of remains fixed after like 4th or 5th grade, from what I understand, for basically the rest of your life. But your EQ is important, your emotional quotient. It's basically how well you get along with other people, how well you read other people, how much charisma you have, how much empathy, how much self-awareness, how successful you are in dealing sensitively with other people. And what Gladwell is going to argue, in part using case studies like Christopher Langan and Robert Oppenheimer is that EQ is incredibly important. IQ is your potential, your intelligence potential, but your EQ is what you're actually able to do to be successful. So we use our iceberg metaphor here in order to go ahead and consider like how important EQ is in manifesting the potential of your IQ. Gladwell's going to look at two dudes to ask you to consider. This Christopher Langan and Robert Oppenheimer. Christopher Langan was, in Gladwell's opinion, not successful, whereas Robert Oppenheimer was, with significant impact on war, society, Japan, United States, World War II, life. Okay, so in addition to IQ and EQ, two big ideas, right? Gladwell is also going to go ahead and consider concerted cultivation and natural growth, two parenting styles. You know, IQ and EQ are a little, like IQ, you know, is supposed to be more, you know, who you are, right? Like it's that talent piece, not so much preparation, not opportunity for IQ. For EQ, though, you have far more control over that. Over life, you know, children get far, far better at understanding the needs of other people around them. And as such, EQ is far more manipulatable than IQ, which is supposed to never really change after fifth grade. We also want to appreciate that these two different parenting styles, right, have profound impact on whether or not people achieve their potential. So, defining the two parenting styles that Gladwell will talk about with you, there's two. Concerted cultivation, right, which is probably what we see most of the time on the plateau. It's when parents attempt to actively foster and assess a child's talents, opinions, and skills. If the child says, I'd like to play a violin, the parent gets a violin and pays someone to give them lessons or teaches them themselves. This is concerted cultivation. Natural growth is parents who see that like as their responsibility to care for their children, to let them grow and develop on their own. Sometimes, like I said, kids in my class think that they've been raised with natural growth, but I think we want to realize that just because your parents like let you do your schoolwork alone, right? That's not exactly natural growth. It's like, say, for example, you know, you wanted to take up a new sport and you went ahead and you did the research online and you found the team and then you had to find the money to buy every aspect of this experience for yourself. And then you also had to find a way to get yourself to and from each and every game and experience. Sometimes natural growth comes from, you know, a parent not having a lot of EQ. Sometimes natural growth comes from socioeconomic underprivilege. And sometimes natural growth comes from, like I said, cultural expectations. So we'll look at the way those things can affect you long term. So what is a parent's role in helping kids fulfill their potential? And then how does affluence or wealth factor into these pieces? So obviously this will be kind of an important piece to apply to our own selves as well. So now, guys, as I mentioned, I'd like you to go ahead over the course of the weekend and Monday. I'd like you to kind of plod through chapters 3 and 4. Next Tuesday, you'll have an opportunity to do an online check-in for chapters 3 and 4, so I can get a little bit of feedback. And then next Thursday, the 11th, we'll have an opportunity to Zoom again if that's the way you like to process Outliers for continuing on with the book. So I thank you all. Do not hesitate to write me an email or go ahead and let me know if there's something that you'd like to Zoom about, if there's any late work that you'd like to revisit. Yeah, in general, I just hope you guys are doing really well. I want to just say thanks. Bye, y'all.